Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I am here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today we are going to be looking at clinical policy critiques. Now, if you're not familiar with the Writing Center, we work with students at several different points, including through webinars such as this, through what we call asynchronous paper reviews, where you make an appointment, you upload your draft by the time the appointment comes around, and we'll send you feedback within 24 hours. You can be just working on trying to interpret the instructions. You can have a paragraph, a page, complete draft, and send that in. We will work with you wherever you are there. Most of our appointments are what we call asynchronous appointments again. If you have something that you'd like to discuss in person, say you have a lot of questions that you'd like to ask in a more dynamic fashion, we do take those. You want to request those by sending an email to onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu. And I just say keep in mind that it's a lot easier to do that at the start of the term than it is in week 7 when we have everyone trying to meet that final deadline. So if you have questions, ask early. We'll do our best to accommodate you. And we have a great deal of resources, including blog posts, paper templates, links to webinars, and other things on the Online Writing Center website. We have a couple webinars that might be of interest to you later in this month. We have tomorrow, I am teaching Intro to Grant Writing Fellowship Edition. So if you have some research that you're doing where you are looking for funding to allow you to do this research better, faster, sooner, we will look at that. And we always focus on things that the students who are attending express an interest in. So if you come in and say, hey, could we look at stuff related to that? Awesome. We have another webinar in our Writing as a Nurse series is coming up on Sunday as general tips for working as a nurse versus working as a nurse on the job versus the writing that you do as a student. We have Dissertation 101, Problem Statements, Purpose Statements, and Research Questions. That's coming up next Thursday at 7 o'clock. I'll be teaching that. And another new installment in the Writing as a Nurse series on social determinants of health coming up at the end of the month. Now, this is just a small selection of the webinars that we have going on in this term. So I've just picked up the next 4 that I thought might be of special interest to people who are attending this one. You can see the complete schedule online. You'll see me referring to an APA course paper template. You can download that from our website. You can also view videos from the series on our YouTube channel and see some things on special topics on our blog. With no further ado, we're going to dive in to our main focus, which is a one particular assignment from Nursing 648. We're going to be looking at the Week 1 Clinical Policy Critique assignment. We'll look at some particular tasks that are included that you have to complete in order to write this paper, and we'll look at some best practices for outlining. I encourage you to ask questions as we go along. The more that you want to hear something, the more that we want to answer it, because there are lots of things that I think are helpful to know. But if you have something that you would like to know, ask away. And if you don't feel comfortable asking that in the open chat room, just send me a private message. People do that all the time, and that's perfectly fine. All right, let's look at this assignment here. So Nursing 648 is the Evidence into Practice course. And so you're probably taking this if you're in our BSN to DNP program. And in week 1, you have this clinical policy critique assignment where you're asked to identify one clinical policy in your organization to critique. And the instructions continue, this policy should be related to direct patient care. Write a 3 to 4 page paper in which you discuss the following components based on your critique of the policy. All right, so there are a lot of assignments where you are writing in more general terms, where you're discussing things in the abstract, or you're talking about things in your general experience. This is asking the workplace that you are in right now. What is something about that you have something to say, that you would like to critique? What is not working, or what could work better? And so you're going to write about this in somewhere between roughly 750 to 1,000 words, 3 to 4 pages of the body of the paper. And there's some specific things that you're being asked to do there. Provide an introduction describing the difference between research, evidence-based practice, and quality improvement, giving examples. To state to what extent is this clinical policy that you are critiquing evidence-based, and to specifically analyze how this policy does or does not incorporate patient preferences, clinical judgment, and research findings. Describe to what extent this clinical policy includes current research in the policy. What quality improvement activities influence the development of this policy or were developed after development? Or were developed after, and these are the direct words here. I think that should be, or were developed after its initial development or deployment to ensure the policy is incorporated into practice. So that's basically saying, okay, well, since this policy first went into place, has it been improved in some way? And if it hasn't, if there are no quality improvement activities around this clinical policy, describe what outcome measures you would assess to know that this policy had an effect on a patient outcome. Discuss how could organizational technology assist in monitoring outcomes. Provide 2 recommendations for improvement to this specific policy that could enhance the components of evidence-based practice, EBP, research, and/or quality improvement activities. And finally, provide a conclusion recalling the issues raised in the introduction and draw together the points made in the main body and explain the overall significance. All right. So all that, we're additionally being given these specifications. You have to address all the topics listed above, which is to say those are required areas of content, not recommendations. The paper must be in APA format. You must have at least 3 references that are less than 5 years old. So it's 2021 now. We're talking sources that were printed in 2017 or earlier. This is part of ensuring that you are using recent literature and you're describing a problem that's still in effect. And it also must be external to course material. So it's not saying that you need to do all the research from scratch, but that at least 3 of your sources must have been published since 2017 and must be something that hasn't been assigned in the course. All right. And again, 3 to 4 pages in length, which means that we're going to have somewhere between 750 and 1,000 words, roughly speaking. And that page limit, that's the body of the paper, not counting the title page or the references. And the instructor has also provided this rubric here, which if we look through this is saying, okay, make sure that you do all of those things that were listed before. The first one, it even says include a concise but thorough introduction of the central idea. And then we go through the list. And when we get to the recommendations for improving it, you're supposed to give 2 specific recommendations. So since you get 2 points for having those 2 recommendations, if you only give 1, you'd expect you'd only get 1 point. And since there are only 10 points total for this assignment, you'd basically be dropping your maximum score from 100 to 90. So yeah, saying take those things seriously, make sure you follow all of those instructions. Okay, and this is one of those points where I'd like to ask the people who are attending for a little bit of an input here, because we can look at all sorts of things here when we do the next step, when we do a literature search. But if you have something that you are very interested in, some sort of area potentially for quality improvement, it doesn't have to be something at your current workplace for the purposes of what I'm doing now, but when you're writing the paper, it should be. So is there something at a current or past workplace that you're curious, is there literature about how to improve that? If so, either type a message in the chat room or send me a message directly, because we're going to be diving into the next step, which is looking at how to find related literature. Now, I'll remind you that the instructions for this assignment do include this note that you must have at least 3 references less than 5 years old, and in addition to any of the course material you covered. So that means we need to find 3 sources, and so I am going to be heading over to the library website. And I'll share my web browser in just a moment, but let's take a look at this list of things that we want to cover. First, we want to be starting with OneSearch, with going through the library website. There are other tools you can use to find stuff, but we want to make sure that our search is timely, it doesn't take more time than it needs to, and that to help ensure that, we want to make sure we have access to everything that we're looking for here. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the library website. And then I'm going to go ahead and do a couple things. I'm going to make sure I'm signed in. That means that any of my search results get saved, and so that I can find them later. That I'm going to have a date restriction, so I'm going to look at stuff from 2017 to the present. Make sure that it has a full text access and that it's published in a scholarly peer-reviewed journal. And then we'll see what comes up with the keywords. And looks like I have a request here, so let me go ahead and I'm going to share my web browser and show you the process here. So I typed in acu.edu/library and I came here. So this is the library portal, and just by default I end up with OneSearch. So the area that I'm going to use for my search right now, I'm going to see if there is literature about telemedicine. It's a huge topic right now. There was not a government mandate that telehealth appointments be reimbursed by insurance companies for the same amount as in-person and appointments until the current pandemic. And one of those big questions, once everyone's vaccinated, et cetera, is what will happen next? Will insurance companies continue to reimburse for the same amount? What do patients want? I don't know, but we are going to do a search to find out. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start by just searching for telemedicine here. Now, one of those things that comes up is that sometimes you'll have an idea of what you're looking for, but you won't find the right search terms for that right away. Now, in this case, I get 381,000 results. So I'm pretty sure telemedicine is a good term for here. But let's go ahead and let's do those other things that were on my list. We're going to go ahead and hit sign in here. So this means that, say my laptop dies before I remember to download these or anything like that, then I will be able to just go in back to the library website, click on sign in, and then go to my search history here and see everything that I've searched for before while signed in. It's a great time saver, especially if you're interrupted and you don't finish your process immediately. But let's go over here to the lower left-hand side. So I'm going to click full text. That means it's only going to show me things that I can read the whole thing immediately. I'm going to click scholarly peer-reviewed journals. So I want it to have gone through a peer review process and not be like an opinion piece. I want it to be evidence-based and gone through that scientific process. And I also am going to be going ahead and selecting that I want this to be from 2017 to 2021. Hold on, I may have clicked something by accident here. Let's back up here. All right, 2017 to 2021. All right, so sometimes you'll find, that you're not getting what you want. And so one of the reasons you do these in stages is because you want to find out where things went awry. Now, it could be that there hasn't been as much stuff making its way through. I'm going to start by just searching for full text here and backing up, seeing what we have here. So adding in that full text restriction, okay, we're down to 188,000. All right, adding on scholarly peer-reviewed, let's see where that takes us to. All right, we have 90,000. All right, so now let me apply a date restriction, but not quite as restrictive as for before. So if I change that to 2000, it's not terribly restrictive. Great. So let's make this 2010. And I will say, if you're looking at this and saying, I'm not sure how or why that does what it does, our librarians are really helpful. And you could even click on this chat with us. And if you catch them during business hours, they will guide you through all the search stuff. You can just tell them what you're looking for and any parameters. There's like needing recent research, and they'll help with you. They will help you with that. All right, so now we're starting to narrow things down here. And if I broaden the search to 2015 to 2021, I'm sorry, narrow the search, I've still got a lot. All right, so I'm going to change this to 2017. And whatever happened earlier, I probably clicked on something and didn't spot it again. But now, going through the steps, retracing the process, I'm still got 35,000 results. So that's great. So let's be more specific. And I see that the person who suggested telemedicine has followed up with a suggestion. So we're going to go ahead and add in primary care. Now, we still have a whole lot of results here. In fact, we have so many, 7,635, that I couldn't possibly read all of them, and nor would I want to. Our goal here is not to read everything on the topic, but to read some of the things that are most relevant to me, because I only need 3 sources that are recent, which in this case we're saying the last 5 years. So I'm going to add a couple more things here. I'm going to go ahead and say, let's search for Texas. Every region has its own differences. I grew up in the Northeast corridor, and if you're in Boston, you've got a lot of people commuting by public transportation, and that tends to put a certain logical limit on how long your commute is. Well, Texas is a big place, and in, say, West Texas, you might have to drive a very long period to get from one place to another. So there are some practical considerations as well as some legal and regulatory things that might make you want to zero in on this. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you are writing a paper like this, many of the assignments in the BSN to DNP program and the standalone DNP program are designed to build towards your eventual doctoral project. This larger project, often a quality improvement project of some sort, where you are looking at some problem or opportunity in a workplace setting and related to, or possibly even exactly your own. And so if you're looking at this and saying, I'm really interested in doing something related to XYZ, you can make that the topic for this paper. And so if you were working on that, well, you might not be getting to the dissertation stage for another year or two. So far we've got 716 results with the restriction of 2017 and or more recent. I could even say, well, I'd like to use this when working on my project, even if I'm not getting there till another 2 years. So I'm just going to move that up to 2019. I still have 375 results. That's great. That's more than enough for this assignment. And it looks like there's a lot that I could do here later. So, all right, I've got lots of results here, and you can even make this even more restrictive if you like. And let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and throw in elderly here. See what that comes up with. Yep, we still got a good number here. All right. And this looks like exactly the kind of thing that I am interested in here. Saying, well, okay, the telemedicine thing, we're kind of making it work now, but that might be because grandma is quarantined with children or grandchildren who are helping now, and that might not always be the case. So I'd like to look into these things here. So, all right, now that we've found a couple articles of interest, let's go back and look at the assignment here. And we're going to dive into the next section. So we've gone through finding related literature. We're going to spend the rest of our time looking at best practices for outlining using this specific assignment as a basis here. So what are some of these best practices that I'm recommending? Well, first, don't reinvent the wheel. The instructor has given you a detailed list of things that you need to have in this paper. So let's start by copy and pasting the assignment instructions and using that as the basis for an outline. We also want to make sure that you don't write more than you need. This is a topic where you saw there were tens of thousands of articles on this topic. So there is far more that you could read than you need, and also far more that you could write than you need. This is only going to be a 3 to 4 page paper. So let's start by making sure we do exactly what's required in terms of the content. And very likely that'll be right around a 3 to 4 page paper length. So as we fill out this outline, we're going to look at and say, okay, well, based on the overall length, here's about how much we think needs to be written on that. We're also going to take note of needed sources. If you're making a claim, if you're backing up what you're saying with evidence, you can make a list saying, okay, supporting citation needed, and add that to your outline. And so then when you go and do your research, when you're looking for those articles, you make sure you get things that will satisfy those requirements. We also want to expand the outline as we go to add additional levels indicating, oh, this is going to be a paragraph, and we need some sentences that do these things as we go. So that when you sit down to do the writing the paper, you have a really detailed map of what's going in, and you're just finessing rather than going and finding and figuring out what you're going to write at each stage. For the next part, we're going to build that outline I talked about. So I mentioned that we're going to use the AP course paper template. There's a link here that you can use to quickly download that. I'll go ahead and type that in the chat room. And you can just grab a copy of that and follow along. All right. So on the slides, while I'm getting things ready, I'm just going to back things up so that we can look at the requirements that we were starting with for this assignment. So again, the task here is to write a paper where we identify a clinical policy that is present in our organization, and we're going to critique that. The policy must be related directly to patient care. So if it's about, the internal promotion process, that's at best indirectly related to patient care. So we want something that impacts how, if people are receiving care or how they're receiving it, and so on and so forth. All right, so I have my template that I've got here. The AP course paper template is a big time saver for two reasons. First, you start with most of the work done for you already about how this is supposed to look. You don't need to spend time on setting the margins. You don't need to spend some time on making sure you're using the right font or something. That's done for you with this course paper template. What you also get is that if you are preparing material for your eventual doctoral project, that the template has the built-in styles so that you can easily populate things like your table of contents, and you won't have trouble copy and pasting here. So in this case, I have my clinical policy critique. So I'm just going to start with that as my paper here. I can come up with a fancier title later, but for now, clinical policy critique says exactly what I am doing. So I can come up with something fancier later, but it does the job. I will not lose points for doing that. This assignment doesn't happen to ask for an abstract, so we'll go ahead and remove that. And let me just change my modes here. All right, I believe the text size here should be fairly easy to read. If it does not work for you, if the text is too small, please let me know because I can zoom in. I have a number of windows I want to show you, but let's start with, let's make this easy to read first. So if you can read this, it's great. If you can't, please just type a message saying it's a little small or it's blurry, and that will let me know to adjust things accordingly. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put in my paper title here, and I'm just going to quickly delete all these placeholders. So we're looking at a blank slate here. Most students will go ahead and they'll save a local copy, and after they've viewed the instructions, they'll just go ahead and save a blank copy so that they can quickly paste things in. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go to the assignment page, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to copy and paste the instructions, all those bullets that were there, and I'm going to paste them into my document here. Just a moment. All right. And when you're pasting, it's a good idea to match the formatting there. So in this case, we'll just go ahead and match that. And so it stays in a bulleted fashion. You can tweak the font later. It's not important for outline here. We're going to start with making sure we have all the things that we want. So one of the things that this assignment asks you to do right away is to make sure that you know the difference between research, evidence, practice, and quality improvement. I won't spend a whole lot of time here because this is something that should actually only take a couple sentences. But remember when I said that you want to have an idea of how long you're going to spend on something? Well, I'm going to tag this with one paragraph. And I'm going to go so far as to say, okay, this is going to be part of my introduction paragraph. So I'll take this note and I'll move that up here. And I'm going to break this into what I think are going to be different sentences. Research. Okay, here's what research is. Here's what evidence-based practice is. Here's what quality improvement is. And I'm going to take this instruction and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cross that out. Oops, sorry. There we go. I realized that it wasn't showing all of the menus that I was using, so I switched to this mode. Again, let me know if the text is not at a convenient size. So I have decided, well, I've got something that I'm going to list in a separate thing, so I'm going to cross out this instruction so I know I did that. And I'm going to have an example of that. And I need an example of this one. So before I sit down to write, I'm going to say, okay, well, okay, definition and example. So I can even start that out. And my example, this was going to be a targeted survey. administered to patients of the clinic. Now, evidence-based practice, this is one of those terms where sometimes people make it overly complicated. It's really just asking, and how do you know that what you're doing is good? And the answer is because it's being tested, it's based on evidence. There has been some research confirming the efficacy or otherwise telling you this is a good thing to do. Now, each of these is going to be about a sentence. So yeah, 5 or 6 sentences, that's going to be an introduction paragraph. Great. All right, so now I'm going to have another paragraph for this here. And looking at the C, okay, we need to also identify the clinical policy that is being critiqued. So that's something that should go in the introduction as well. And so I realized, oh, okay. And I'm going to go here and say, okay, clinical policy being critiqued is the and just thinking, okay, what's the policy and what's my workplace? The sentence practically writes itself because you say, okay, what's the policy? Well, it's the clinical policy being critiqued is the non-adoption of telemedicine for routine primary care appointments at the ABC Health Clinic. And then you might go and say, okay, I need to explain routine meaning also non-pandemic primary care appointments at the health clinic. Great. So I've listed that critique, and so now I can talk about the existing critique. And we've got a couple things to answer here. And you could include all of this under the broader heading of about the policy. So I'll go ahead and make this a sub-bullet, and I just create a new one where there's a new thing it's asking. And in this case, to what extent is this clinical policy evidence-based? So in this case, it's not evidence-based. It was an arbitrary decision by the founder of the clinic. They've never really tested to see, well, is this good for us or not? It's just kind of been doing it. All right, so now this next one, how does this incorporate or not incorporate patient preferences, clinical judgment, and research findings? All right, so it can essentially split this into each of these sub things. Now, I might be able to identify and answer all these pretty quickly. So let's go ahead and see. And in my case, well, since the founder basically made a decision to do that, I can look at this and say, well, it's all saying the same thing. I can put all that into one sentence that says it does not. And then we'll want to say, well, okay, why? What are the implications of that? And this is one of those things that as you progress through the BSN to DNP coursework, and as you proceed to the following DNP courses, if you're at that joining point of the program, that question of, well, okay, what does this mean? How does this matter? That's the kind of thing, the synthesis is where you're applying the information and making new meaning. That's really what makes a good graduate level paper. Now, if we're to go through this here, you see we have, so far, we've taken 2 main bullets from the rubric, and they've both ended up in around one paragraph. So we're talking two-thirds to a page maximum. And at this point, we start looking and see, well, okay, most of these things look like it's going to be around a paragraph each. And if you guesstimate, yeah, some things might be a little bit longer. Some things might take a little bit more detail. If we just estimate about a paragraph each, that tells me about how many sentences to have. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 paragraphs. That's actually, 8 paragraphs. That's going to come in right around 3.5 pages. So just by looking at this and going through a couple, we see, all right, really, we don't want to spend too much time on any of these things because we have time for a average sized paragraph, and then we'll be more or less done with the 3 to 4 pages that we're required to add here. So the next step is to keep going through here and filling in all these and make sure that you are citing the literature. Now, here's one of those places where it's going to come up here. Describe to what extent this clinical policy includes current research in the policy. So when you go and do your literature search, you're like, okay, well, what are other people doing? What are the best policies and what are the findings here? That's when you start going in and plugging in some other information. And let's go back to the web browser here because there are a couple things I wanted to show you. So you should now be seeing my web browser again. And let's go back to the results here. Now, I'm really interested in what's going to happen after we go back from the pandemic. And so I'm going to collect some sources that are going there. And you might notice this cite button here. This is a nice time saver. It's not perfect, but it's a nice time saver. If I click on cite here, then this will pop up a screen here where I can scroll through and find APA style and go ahead and copy this into my references section. Is it perfect? No, a lot of the stuff is done by algorithms, so there may be minor errors in capitalization. There may be errors in the exact formatting of, say, the volume or issue, but this one looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy and paste that into my references section. So back to the Word document. And that's going to go into my Word, that section. Go ahead and match destination formatting. And so you can see, oh, immediately we're in that Times New Roman 12 point and everything. And so I know I can cite this as Kim et al. 2019. All right, now up here, when I am working on expanding this from one bullet into a detail thing where we've got a sub-bullet for each sentence, one of the things, okay, it will just answer directly. Does not currently do that. And say commit all, and that was from 2019. And you can just start putting in little placeholders like this as you amass your sources here, because you know that that's a paragraph that you're going to be discussing those. So might as well go ahead and give yourself a note there so you know that's what's there. And when you see, oh, well, I've got 3 sources in that one paragraph, that's a good point to stop, because again, you're required to have at least 3 sources recently published that were not part of the course materials. And that's all you need. So if you go through and you write this outline and you end up with 3.5 pages, you say, I feel like my argument would be strengthened by having another one. Great, you can go and add that because you still have the space. But start with making sure you've got everything that's required, and then see, do you have that room to add more? Do you have a need to add more? And that helps ensure that you write a paper that is in a manageable format, is written efficiently, that is doing exactly what the professor is asking you to do. and then you can finish and move on to all the other things. At this point, I am going to turn the room over to my colleague, Julie Johnson Archer, who will be the lead presenter for the next webinar that's coming. Thank you very much for coming to our webinar here on critiquing in clinical policies. If you received an email about this before 5:30, you're already on our list to receive a copy of the recording. But if you did not get an email from us until around 5:30 today, and you would like a copy of the recording, just send me your email address, type it in the chat window, and we'll go from there. So thank you very much for attending this webinar. And if you're here for the Intro to the Online Writing Center, you're in the right place. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes for that one. Thank you for coming.